Hi, y'all. Welcome back to Gen X Life Lab. I think a lot of people in midlife believe they're stuck because they're lazy or unmotivated or scared of change. But I don't think that's the case at all. Gen X, we learned how to survive, but not necessarily how to want. And I think a lot of us became so good at surviving, so good at being needed, so good at adapting, that somewhere along the way, we stopped knowing what we wanted. And now we're standing in the middle of our lives completely exhausted, staring at changes we secretly ache for, while being terrified of the outcomes, because failing would hurt. But succeeding might blow up the entire identity you built your life around. And I don't think we talk enough about how terrifying that is, especially for Gen X, especially for people who spent decades being the reliable one. Most people aren't stuck because they're lazy. They're stuck because change threatens identity. Gen X was raised to be practical, self-sufficient. Functionality was our driving force, and there was no room for emotional intelligence. If we were upset, we were told, "Quit your crying, or I will give you something to cry about." If we were hurt, just rub some dirt on it and get back out there. You'll be fine. We learned, don't need too much. Don't fall apart. Don't inconvenience people. Just keep going. A lot of us became adults before we ever became ourselves. When I was a little kid, I lived in a neighborhood full of boys. And we had this really long alley that ran behind our houses. And we would often set up ramps for us to ride our bicycles over, or one kid even had a little mini bike. So we would pile up cinder blocks and bricks and pieces of plywood. And of course, somebody had to test the ramp. Well, guess who that was most of the time? Because I was the only girl. Yeah, that's right. It was me. So I would race down through there fearless and try that ramp. And sometimes it worked, but most of the time it didn't. But even though I knew most of the time it wasn't going to work, at that age, I was still willing to try it, willing to give it a go. But somewhere along the way, we lost our fearlessness. Fear of change is an obvious one because we are ingrained. It's part of our little lizard brain that tries to keep us exactly where we are because it's safe and it's comfortable. And if we try to venture out too far, it'll drag us back in and say, no, you don't need to change that. You just need to stay right here because you know what to expect. Another part of that is the fear of failure. Well, what if I leave the cave and I get eaten by a dinosaur? That would be embarrassing. But in modern times, it still manifests within us. Don't change the status quo. Our brains are geared to keep us on that status quo. That's why it's so difficult to form new habits. Every new year, people make resolutions, and by 2 months in, they're falling apart. A lot of times, that fear of failure is lying to us. But sometimes it takes the voice of our parents saying, no, you just need to get a good job and stick with it. What do you mean you're dissatisfied? Who cares? And changes, especially at this time of life, bring along financial fears because we're established in our lives. Most of us have a good job. We are able to pay our bills. We're able to set a little money aside for retirement. But if you start trying new things, what if something happens and you lose that financial foundation that you have? There's another one that I think is more pervasive than a lot of people care to think. Embarrassment. What if you tell your friends and your family, hey, I'm going to go try this new thing, and if they don't ridicule you at the beginning, you may just get a lot of side eye and rolled eyes and that type of thing. But if you try it and it doesn't work out, you'll get ridiculed, saying, you should have just let that go. You had no business taking that on. It's no big deal. Just go back to your job. And that's something that at this age, we don't want. We don't want to look foolish at this age. There's another fear of failure, saying, well, you know what? I should have had this all figured out by now. So the fact that I don't, that means there's something wrong with me. I'm defective. So I just need to not even try that. There's a fear of wasting time. That's another big one. We see the clock ticking down, the years going by, another birthday where we're blowing out more and more candles. And we're looking at how much time that we have invested in our lives. And we don't want to waste any more of it on frivolous pursuits. But if not now, when are you going to do it? It's never too late. It's only too late if you don't start now. And there's a fear of regret. You might try something, it might not go the way you think it will, and then you end up regretting your time spent, your money spent, and you're ready to not try anything again. Midlife failure feels very public because we're not kids anymore. We're not supposed to be trying things on. That's what society will tell us. You have the life you built. Be happy with that. It's younger people who are out there trying to find themselves. It's not us Gen Xers. Surely not. We should have it all figured out. That's not the truth. And some of us, and I'm in this category, I thought, who's going to want to see some 60-year-old woman talk about the things that she's passionate about? Nobody. But we'll see what happens. So rather than putting things off, I encourage you just to start trying in little increments, if that's what's needed. Failure in midlife doesn't just feel like failure. It feels like evidence that all of those fears are true. Evidence that we never should have tried this in the first place. We never should have put ourselves out there. So I have a few questions for you. What dream did you quietly stop talking about? Do you remember something from when you were younger that you were all excited about? That you thought, I'm going to do that. But then life got in the way and you talked about it less and less until you eventually stopped. What is that? You can mention it down in the comments, or write it down on a piece of paper, or write it on your computer. What part of yourself did practicality replace? I know for me, practicality squashed the adventurous spirit that I used to have. I had too many ideas and not enough funding to do it. Now I have plenty of funding and I still have all the ideas, but I find myself shying away. Now, I'm going to talk about another fear. This is one that you don't hear a lot about. It seems natural to be afraid of failing. But what about if you succeed? For some people, they don't want to put themselves out there for a new venture and succeed and surpass their parents. For some people, it's a foreign world to them. They can't even imagine what a life would be like if they loved what they did and they had the finances to do whatever they wanted to do. So they shy away from it because they don't know what that world would look like. But what if, just what if, you became happier, more honest with yourself and with everybody else, less available? Sometimes chasing after the things we want mean we have to put up boundaries. We have to stop being a people pleaser and to be the person serving everybody else and never taking any time for ourselves. What if things became different? What if you became less needed? I have a friend whose entire identity is built around being needed by people. And if she doesn't have somebody that she's trying to help with something, she feels at odds and ends. Yet she'll, in the background, complain about not being able to do anything for herself or do any of the things that she wants to do because she's serving all these other people. But she's built that world. Some people fear success because success requires an identity change. Because it does. We have to change our minds. We have to change what we believe is possible and be willing to try that. And it's scary. Plus, for a lot of us, we have this whole family system that is going to put up resistors right away. As soon as we start talking about doing something, being somebody that we have never talked about doing and never talked about being, and suddenly they're thinking, well, what about me? You know, you do this for me all the time. Are you not going to be able to do that for me anymore? Family systems, those who are closest to us, they seem to struggle the most when we start changing things because they're so used to us being the person that we've been, even if we're miserable inside. Some people unconsciously maintain roles like the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the achiever, the responsible one. And reinvention threatens all of that. Because as with my friend who wanted to do everything for everybody, but secretly she hated it, but wasn't willing to change to stop that cycle, it threatened her equilibrium. She wasn't able to see who she could be if she stopped this and actually did something for herself. Sometimes we stay miserable because misery keeps us recognizable. You know, your nervous system may associate self-betrayal with safety. It's comfortable. You know what to expect. Gen Xers, I think, feel this most deeply. You know, we were the latchkey kids. We were doing for ourselves and being practical and responsible from the time we could, you know, put a step stool up by the sink to do dishes. We were trained to suppress our emotions, to suppress our desires. We became hyper competent. So people began to rely on us in ways that no child should ever have to be relied upon. Our survival became our personality. And, you know, one of the things that people associate with Gen X is our cynicism. We developed that to protect ourselves because being vulnerable in a world that expects so much of you was frowned upon. It was considered a weakness. Gen Xers, we were praised for handling things on our own, for not needing anybody. So that only reinforced that mindset within us. So now, because that's been so reinforced in us, we don't know how to ask for help. We don't know how to ask for what we want. We don't know how to rest, to be still. We don't know how to want. We don't know how to dream. Because dreams were frivolous. Dreams were a waste of time. We don't know how to start over. A lot of Gen X adults became emotionally fluent in responsibility and emotionally disconnected from desire. And that's something that we're going to try to overcome as we go on this journey. So how do we start reclaiming ourselves? You know, self-reclamation often begins very quietly. For one, admitting you have a problem, which means admitting you're unhappy. Noticing when those feelings of resentment stir up inside of you. Acknowledging that you're just flat out tired. You're exhausted from trying to keep all the plates in the air. You're grieving your lost years, feeling like you wasted half your lifetime on things that you didn't love, didn't care about, that stripped away who you are. And telling the truth privately first. Because sometimes, if you're married, that's a conversation you need to have with your partner. To just say, hey, I'm unhappy. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do about it right now, but I'm going to be trying to figure that out. So I would encourage you, if you're a journaler, start taking stock of your feelings and your emotions and start writing them down. Ask yourself, what do I keep fantasizing about? What version of me keeps showing up in my imagination? Because those are some heavy-duty clues. Where do I feel most emotionally numb? What would I change if I stopped organizing my life around being useful? Ask yourself those questions. If you're not a journaler, then just sit with them. See what comes up. You don't need certainty to begin. You need honesty. Honesty with yourself first of all, first and foremost. So this is your light. You have permission. It's okay to get real with yourself. It's okay to go gold mining inside of yourself and see what you come up with, what kind of nuggets you discover. There's a world full of possibility out there, just waiting for you, waiting for the kid that you were. Because there's nobody else like you. The world decided that a U-shaped person was needed to walk this earth. So you're here. Why don't we start finding out why? You know, maybe this season in your life isn't asking you to become someone new. Maybe it's asking you to stop abandoning the person you already are. You know, you may have heard the story about Michelangelo talking about when he created the statue David. Someone asked him, how do you do that? And he says, I just take away all the pieces that don't belong. So let's start taking off those pieces that aren't who we are, that don't belong, and start seeing what's underneath. Because I think that's a pretty exciting prospect. You know, our identities were built on very adult things when we were such young children. And a lot of times that suffering is tied to our identity stability. And it's hooked in there so early on in our lives that it's difficult to shake it off. So I get it if some of you are saying, no, this isn't going to be for me. A lot of times we survive by becoming what other people needed. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's time to start letting it go, though. As Gen Xers, a lot of us, we're high-functioning adults, but we're completely disconnected from our desires and our emotions. So it's time to start discovering what those are. Midlife isn't just about aging or grieving the unlived lives that we could have had. Because you're still here. It's not too late. So, I'm going to ask you, what part of yourself do you think you lost while trying to survive adulthood? Heck, while trying to survive childhood? And these questions I'm going to ask you, go ahead and answer them in the comments. Let's start a discussion, because I think it would be interesting to see that we think we're all very different, but we're really very much the same and have a lot of the same thoughts, a lot of the same ideas, and a lot of the same fears when it comes around to changing ourselves at this phase in our life. So I'm going to repeat that first question. What part of yourself do you think you lost while trying to survive childhood or adulthood? Do you fear failure more or the consequences of succeeding? When was the last time you asked yourself what you actually wanted? That's going to be a big one for a lot of us. What role have you played in your family for so long that you don't know who you are outside of it? What dream became impractical somewhere along the way? Does reinvention feel exciting to you, or does it feel terrifying? What line in this video hit you the hardest? If this video felt a little too familiar, you're not alone. I think a lot of people are quietly waking up in midlife to realize they survived their lives more than they lived them. And that realization can feel heartbreaking, but strangely hopeful. Because awareness is where self-reclamation begins. So if these conversations help you feel a little more seen and a little less alone, I'd love for you to stay connected here. And if you feel comfortable, tell me in the comments, what part of yourself are you trying to reconnect with right now?